Chapter 41, Bad News 1. Zhang Yuan's eyes flickered with surprise when he heard his captain's order. Remembering what had happened at the gas station, he had a sinking feeling that something terrible was about to unfold. Nodding firmly, he left to make the necessary preparations. Jin Zuyan walked to the window. Standing there, his fists clenched tightly behind his back. The storm raged outside and there was no roar of zombies. It was as if they had returned to the time before the apocalypse. He was calm and steady, but at that moment, no one knew what he was thinking. Less than an hour later, the soldiers returned to the living room. Zhang Yuan walked up to Jin Zuyan and reported, "Captain, it's done." Jin Zuyan turned to look at his team. This time, he wasn't sure how many of them would survive. Lowering his gaze for a brief moment, he concealed the storm of emotions within him. When he looked up again, his expression was calm. "We will stay here until the rain stops. From now on, everyone must check their temperature every half hour. If you feel unwell, report it immediately," he said solemnly. The soldiers exchanged uncertain glances when they heard his words. After a moment, Wen Kai asked, "Captain, what should we do next?" "Go to sleep." The answer left them stunned. Ever since the world had turned into a living hell, with zombies overrunning the streets, this was the first time their captain had given such an order. Jin Zuyan noticed their hesitation and doubt, but he had no way to explain. Only those who had lived through the nightmare that followed this rain would understand. Being able to sleep was a rare luxury. A familiar figure surfaced in his mind, and he clenched his fists. Taking a deep breath, he pushed down the anxiety surging inside him. Right now, all he could do was hope that she was safe, that she had managed to escape Linen University before it was too late. At the same time, at the lecture hall of Linen University, the students cheered when they saw that it was raining. Although Teacher Cao had taken away the supplies found by Pei Yijun and his team, he only gave them half a cup of water and a small pack of biscuits every day. They thought he was stingy and wanted to keep all the water and food for himself. The truth was because of Chu Zhimiao's water-type ability. Pei Yijun and his team focused on getting food and only bringing back some water. Therefore, at this moment, Teacher Cao's team lacked water the most. Noticing the students' intentions, Teacher Cao narrowed his eyes and said, "Brother Yang, go check how much water we have. Also, bring back some empty bottles or containers to collect the rainwater." Hearing his words, Brother Yang nodded and asked, "What about Pei Yijun and his friends?" Teacher Cao sneered and replied, "Since they have escaped, there is no need to bother with them. They have been starving for a day. Even if they can run from us, there is no guarantee they will survive for long. With the storm and zombies, it will be hard for them to find food." Brother Yang nodded and said, "Then I will inform our brothers to find containers and collect rainwater." After leaving the lecture hall, Brother Yang walked to the staff room and opened the door. The moment he did, he was stunned. The room was empty. Besides the walls and a layer of dust on the floor, there was nothing else. He rushed inside and looked around. Not to mention supplies, there wasn't even a crumb of biscuit left. Without supplies, there was no way they could survive for long. Even with water, they still needed to go out to find food. Thinking about the dangers outside, his face turned pale, and he quickly ran back to report. When he returned to the lecture hall, he walked to Teacher Cao in hurried steps. Noticing his pale face and panic, Teacher Cao frowned and asked, "What's wrong?" Brother Yang leaned down and whispered, "Brother Cao, the supplies are gone." As soon as he heard this, Teacher Cao stood up and exclaimed, "What did you say?" Hearing his shout, the students turned to look at him with doubt and curiosity. Teacher Cao saw this and lowered his voice. "How can so many supplies disappear just like that?" "Brother Cao, maybe Pei Yijun and his team took the supplies," Brother Yang said. "Impossible. Even if they wanted to take them, they didn't know where we hid them. What's more, they would have to carry the supplies to the entrance, and we would have noticed them," Teacher Cao said with a deep frown. Both of them went silent for a moment before Brother Yang asked, "Brother Cao, Is it possible that Sister Wu betrayed us and helped Pei Yijun take the supplies? Otherwise, why would she suddenly disappear? She must have left with them. Hearing his words, Teacher Cao felt it made sense. Anger surged in his heart and he cursed, "That bitch, I will peel off her skin if I find her." "Brother Cao, what should we do now?" Brother Yang asked. Right now, they were able to control the students because they had supplies. If they didn't, it would be hard to keep them in order. Most of Teacher Cao's team members had already tasted the joy of holding power. There were still many female students they hadn't touched yet. How could they be willing to let them escape? After a while, Teacher Cao finally said, "For now, we must gather as much rainwater as possible. As for food, we will go out after the rain stops." Right now, they had no other choice, so Brother Yang could only nod and say, "Okay." Sitting not far from them, a female student stared at them with cold eyes full of hatred. She gritted her teeth and dragged her sore body toward the group of students. Chapter 42, Bad News 2. The female student sat down at the corner and leaned against the wall. Beside her, a male student handed her a pack of biscuits and said, "Eat something first." The female student stared at the biscuit in a daze for a while before reaching out to take it. She looked at the male student and said hoarsely, "Thank you." Looking at the bite marks and hickeys on the female student's body, the male student lowered his gaze and said nothing. He had watched Teacher Cao humiliate his female classmates, but he neither had the courage nor the ability to help them. He felt ashamed for assisting the bad people by doing nothing. All he could do was try to make life a little bit better for them. The female student knew that Teacher Cao and his team would run out of food soon, so she only ate a piece of biscuit and hid the rest in her clothes. Then she took 2 sips of water. This bottle of water was given to her after Teacher Cao vented his lust on her. Thinking about what had just happened and feeling the pain in her lower body, tears fell from the corner of her eyes. Biting her lip, she wiped away her tears. She must survive and find her parents. She couldn't let herself crumble from this. Not long after, Brother Yang returned with his team, carrying several empty gallon bottles and basins. Seeing this, the students' eyes lit up. Since Teacher Cao's team was also collecting rainwater, they should follow suit. Everyone quickly drank their water and ran to the window to fill their empty bottles. The female student watched them but didn't follow. When she saw the male student beside her about to drink all of his water, she reached out to stop him and said, "You must save your water." The male student looked at her and said, "We can fill the bottle with rainwater later." The female student shook her head and said, "I don't think it's safe to drink the rainwater. Not only do we not know if the rain carries a virus or bacteria, but considering all the dust in the air before the rain, the water isn't safe for consumption." Thinking about her words, the male student finally listened to her. He glanced at her and asked, "Are you okay?" Hearing this, the female student chuckled and said, "Even if I'm not okay, what can I do? I can't kill him and I don't want to kill myself." After a moment of silence, the male student took off his jacket and handed it to her without saying a word. The female student was stunned by this and realized that her clothes were torn and her body was seen. She took the jacket, put it on, and whispered, "Thank you." "I'm sorry," he said after a moment of silence. His voice was so soft that it was drowned out by the sound of rain outside. The female student said nothing and lowered her head to rest. With the windows open, the lecture hall was not as stifling as before, and the rancid stench in the air was washed away by the fresh breeze. Teacher Cao looked at the students, who were busy filling their bottles with rainwater, and narrowed his eyes. Everyone was full of joy and didn't notice that the night was eerily silent. At the same time, not far from Linen University, the zombies stood under the rain with their heads raised and eyes closed. They remained motionless like statues. The rain drenched their rotten flesh and torn, dirty clothes. Without anyone noticing, their decayed flesh and dead muscles slowly evolved. The zombies' joints and muscles became more flexible and stronger, while their flesh no longer saggy as they grew more solid. While most of the zombies underwent small changes, Those who had already broken through to level 1 experienced more significant transformations. Their gray eyes slowly changed color, their nails and teeth grew sharper, and their energy increased. When their gray eyes finally turned completely black, they opened their mouths and let out throaty roars as they raised their heads. Roar! On the rooftop of Linen University's library, a zombie opened its eyes. Its black pupils glinted under the dim red moonlight as it raised its head and let out a roar. After the long roar, the motionless zombies within a 5-kilometer radius opened their eyes and began moving, heading toward Linen University slowly. At that moment, the same phenomenon occurred globally, but due to the storm, no one noticed the impending danger. Inside a restaurant several kilometers away from Linen University, Jiao Lijai suddenly opened her eyes. Cold sweat covered her forehead and back as she breathed heavily. Her eyes were unfocused, as if she were still trapped in a nightmare. Sitting nearby, Pei Yijun looked over when he saw her suddenly wake up. He put down his fire axe and walked over. He squatted beside her chair and asked, "What's wrong?" Hearing his voice, Jiao Lijai snapped out of her daze. Her eyes finally regained focus, and she turned her head to look at him. After a moment, she said, "We must leave this place as soon as the rain stops." Noticing her cold sweat and pale face, he asked, "Did you have a nightmare?" Closing her eyes, Jiao Lijai took a deep breath and said hoarsely, "There will be a zombie horde after the rain. We must leave as soon as possible, or we will be trapped here." Hearing this, Pei Yijun narrowed his eyes and asked, "How do you know that?" Jiao Lijai pushed herself up and replied, "Don't you find it strange that there haven't been any zombies at all? This rain is unusual, and when something is out of the ordinary, it usually brings bad news." "Aren't you overthinking?" Pei Yijun asked, raising an eyebrow. Seeing his disbelief, Jiao Lijai didn't continue trying to persuade him. Instead, she said, "I will leave when the rain stops. Whether you stay or go is up to you." Chapter 43, Bad News 3. After she finished her words, Jiao Lijai stood up and headed to the 3rd floor. Pei Yijun and his team had used the bathroom on the 1st floor, and she didn't want to use that one because of the smell. So she could only go to the 3rd floor. After closing the bathroom door, she entered her space, washed her face, took care of her needs, and got something to eat. As she ate, memories of her past life flashed through her mind. After this rain, the situation in Linen City would worsen. Although several refugee camps would be built by the government or ability users, they wouldn't be able to withstand the zombie attacks. In less than 5 months, this city would become a ghost city. Before that happened, she needed to gather as many supplies as possible and leave. As for others, she neither had the energy nor the intention to help them. If she met people on the road, she would warn them of the danger, but that was all. Her priority was survival. After finishing her meal, she exercised for 2 hours to improve her stamina and strength. When she was done, she took a shower and changed clothes. Since she had nothing else to do, she retrieved 2 basins of water and her dirty clothes. She needed to wash them soon, or she would run out of clean clothes. As she poured out her clothes from the basket, she was stunned by their condition. Picking up one of the pants, she examined it carefully and realized that aside from a few tears, it was as clean as new. Letter 1D453, letter 1D4C7, letter 1D626, letter 212F, letter 1D638, letter 1D626. Letter 1D450, letter 1D450, letter 1D4C2. Bringing the fabric close to her nose, she took a sniff. Besides the sour stench of sweat, there was no other odor. She was lost in thought for a moment before an idea flashed in her mind. "Could it be that my space has an auto-cleaning function?" she muttered. But when she smelled the lingering sweat on the pants, she dismissed the idea. If her space had an auto-cleaning function, her clothes wouldn't still smell bad. Although she still didn't fully understand her space, she was quite pleased with its partial cleaning function. Without black blood, rotten flesh, or heavy stains, washing her clothes would be much easier. She mixed some washing powder with water and soaked her clothes before scrubbing them by hand. Half an hour later, she finished washing and hung them on a pole to dry. When she exited her space and went downstairs, she saw Pei Yijun and his team sitting together, discussing something. Judging by their serious expressions, it seemed he had already told them what she had said earlier. Seeing her come down, Chu Zhimiao waved at her and said, "Lijai, come here." Walking over, Zhao Lijai took a seat beside her and asked, "What's wrong?" "Senior Pei told us about your plan. Where are you planning to go after leaving this place?" Li Yang asked. Zhao Lijai glanced at Pei Yijun before answering. "I plan to gather more supplies and head to Sanchu City." "Sanchu City? Are you looking for someone there?" Feng Yun asked. Although Zhao Lijai didn't have anyone to find, she still nodded. "My family lives there, and I also plan to go search for them. How about we go together?" Feng Yun suggested. Hearing this, Zhao Lijai lowered her gaze and frowned. In her past life, Feng Yun had never left the team after joining Pei Yijun's group. Why did he suddenly want to go to Sanchu City? Seeing her hesitation, Feng Yun added, "Even if we travel together, I will be responsible for my own safety and food. I won't be a burden." After thinking for a moment, Zhao Lijai nodded. "Okay." Pei Yijun looked at her and wanted to offer his help, but before he could speak, the satellite phone in his backpack rang. Hearing this, he quickly retrieved it and answered, "Hello." A deep male voice came through the phone the moment he picked up the call. "Pei Yijun, how is your situation?" As soon as Zhao Lijai heard this voice, her eyes widened in surprise. She turned to look at Pei Yijun while listening intently. "Captain Jin, we are safe for now. When will you arrive?" Pei Yijun asked. "We will depart as soon as the rain stops. Are you still at Linen University?" Jin Zuyan asked. "No, my friends and I have already left. We are currently staying in a restaurant 9 kilometers from the university," Pei Yijun replied. After a moment of silence, Jin Zuyan asked, "Why did you suddenly decide to leave? Did something happen?" "Something did happen, but we decided to leave because of my friend's warning." On the other end of the line, Jin Zuyan frowned at his words. A thought flashed through his mind and he asked, "What is your friend's name?" Pei Yijun frowned at the strange question, but since he still needed Jin Zuyan's help, he answered, "Zhao Lijai." The moment he heard this name, Jin Zuyan's heart skipped a beat. His hands trembled with excitement, and he had to take several deep breaths to calm himself. "My team and I should reach your location in about 8 hours. If possible, stay put and wait for us," he said hoarsely. "Okay," Pei Yijun agreed readily. Due to the unstable signal, the call was cut off after a few minutes. Pei Yijun put away his satellite phone and walked back to the group. As she listened, Zhao Lijai was certain this was the same voice she had heard before she was torn apart by zombies in her past life. His voice felt familiar, but she couldn't recall who he was. Pei Yijun sat down, looked at Zhao Lijai and said, "Zhao Lijai, why don't you wait until the soldiers arrive before you leave? It will be much safer that way." Zhao Lijai thought for a moment and nodded. "Okay." She was confident she could leave the city alone, but she wanted to find out who that voice belonged to. Chapter 44, Hidden Danger. As the night deepened, Teacher Cow, his team, and the students finally finished filling all the empty bottles and containers they could find with rainwater. Some were so thirsty and hungry that they drank the rainwater directly before refilling their bottles. No one knew whether it was due to the low temperature or poor hygiene, but several people developed high fevers that night. At first, no one noticed, as most were asleep. But at dawn, when the sky brightened, one of the students finally realized that the person sleeping beside him was burning up. Reaching out, he pushed his friend and said, "Hey, what's wrong with you?" At his touch, his friend collapsed to the ground without waking up. Startled by this, the student quickly checked on him and saw his flushed face, labored breathing, and sweat-drenched clothes. He was clearly unconscious, and his pale skin and chapped lips made his condition look even worse. Realizing the severity of the situation, the student shouted, "Teacher Cow, my friend has a high fever, please help him." One of the patrolling men hurried over after hearing his words. Upon seeing the student's state, A flash of excitement crossed his eyes as he recalled what had happened to a team member before they awakened their abilities. He quickly turned to the dividing screen and called out, "Brother Cow, someone is mutating." Right now, their team desperately needs ability users. If some students managed to awaken abilities and joined them, it would significantly strengthen their group. Hearing the commotion, Teacher Cow startled awake. He glared at the man and scolded, "Why are you shouting? Do you want the zombies to hear us?" Instead of looking guilty, the man grinned and said, "Brother Cow, this is good news. One of the students is mutating." Teacher Cow's eyes lit up at his words, and he quickly wore his shoes while saying, "Let's check on him." "Yes." The two hurried over to the student with high fever and confirmed that he was indeed undergoing an awakening. Since ability users were rare, Teacher Cow placed great importance on them. He waved his hand and ordered, "Give him more water and find a way to lower his temperature." The student watching over his friend felt relieved. He had feared that Teacher Cow wouldn't care about their lives, but it turned out he still had a conscience after all. "Thank you, Teacher Cow," he said gratefully. Soon, more students reported similar conditions among their friends. Out of 67 students, 11 were undergoing the awakening process. As for the rest, they experienced only fatigue and weakness, which they attributed to a lack of proper food. Those in the midst of mutation were gathered in one area, with several students assigned to care for them. They were given rainwater to drink, and their bodies were wiped down with it to lower their fevers. Unbeknownst to them, the more they drank and touched the rainwater, the worse their conditions became. Everyone believed their friends would awaken abilities and become important figures in Teacher Cow's group. Only a single female student and the male student beside her felt anxious. Both noticed that the students had dark circles under their eyes, and their eyes became red after drinking rainwater. "There are red lines in the white areas, as if I haven't slept for several days." Those who consume more rainwater even walk in weird ways. Their movement seemed stiffer and slower than usual. Sitting in the corner, the female student whispered, "We need to leave this place as soon as possible." The male student nodded and replied, "They are distracted right now. We can slip out through the back door." Hearing this, the female student stood up and carefully moved toward the back. Since Teacher Cow and his team were focused on the students' conditions, no one noticed as the two quietly slipped away. Once outside the lecture hall, the male student supported her as they walked and asked, "My name is Gu Shayaz. What's yours?" The female student glanced at him and replied, "Wrong more." Gu Shayaz nodded and suggested, "Wrong more, let's team up to survive." Shaking her head, Wrong more said, "I need to go back to my town and find my parents. I can't go with you." "That's fine. I will go with you. I have nowhere else to go anyway," Gu Shayaz said with a small smile. Looking at his smiling face, Wrong more sighed and said, "Suit yourself." Gu Shayaz looked at the pouring rain and asked, "It's still raining and we can't leave the building. Where should we go now?" "We should head to the ground floor and hide there. Once the rain stops, it will be easier to leave," Wrong more replied after some thought. Thinking for a moment, Gu Shayaz said, "Then let's go to the guard room." "Okay." After they had a plan, the two made their way downstairs, reaching the guard room half an hour later. Once inside, they locked the door and breathed a sigh of relief. Noticing that Wrong more was barefoot, Gu Shayaz rummaged through the locker room and returned with a set of clothes and a pair of sneakers. He handed them to her while saying, "They might be too big, but they are better than nothing." Wrong more accepted them and said, "Thank you." "No problem. You can change in the locker room," Gu Shayaz said, feeling awkward. Wrong more noticed his expression but said nothing. She went inside, removed her torn clothes, and used them to wipe herself clean. As she did, the hatred in her heart made her eyes burn red. At that moment, a dark thought crossed her mind. If only I could burn those bastards to death, how good it would be. They don't even deserve an intact corpse. As soon as the thought formed, fire suddenly engulfed her hands. Shocked by the sudden fire, she let out a panicked cry. "Ah!" Letter 1D557, letter 1D5FF, letter 1D556, letter 1D410, letter 1D430, letter 1D5F2. Letter 1D680, letter 1D428, letter 1D696. Hearing her cry, Gu Shayaz rushed in and froze at the sight before him. Chapter 45, Fire and Water. At this moment, Rong Moore's hands were covered in flames, while her discarded clothes were already reduced to ashes. Acting fast, he grabbed a rag and tried to extinguish the fire. But no matter what he did, the flames were still burning. When he raised his head, Gu Shayaz was stunned by Rong Moore's eyes. Her pupils had turned red, flickering as if flames were burning within them. Noticing his stunned reaction, Rong Moore felt scared and cried out, "Gu Shayaz, save me. I don't want to die." Fear welled up inside her, and tears gathered in her eyes. But before they could fall, they evaporated into mist due to her high body temperature. Gu Shayaz froze when he saw this, his hands still midair. His initial instinct to help her faded as he took several steps back. He let out a sigh of relief and said, "Rong Moore, calm down." She glared at him when she heard his words and asked, "How can you tell me to calm down when I'm burning like this?" "Rong Moore, do you feel any pain?" he asked carefully. The moment she heard his words, she was taken aback. She had been so panicked that she hadn't even noticed her condition. But now that he mentioned it, there was indeed no pain at all. The only discomfort she felt was the lingering soreness in her lower body. At this realization, her eyes widened in shock. Gu Shayaz smiled when he saw her reaction and said, "Congratulations, Rong Moore. You have awakened a superpower." The realization sent a wave of excitement through her. She threw her head back and burst into laughter. With this power, she could finally avenge herself. Those bastards would burn. They wouldn't even deserve an intact corpse. She would make sure to burn them all. But as the laughter faded, her emotions crashed down on her like a tidal wave. She squatted and wrapped her arms around her knees with her head lowered. The flames on her hands flickered, growing smaller until they disappeared entirely. Seeing her trembling shoulders, Gu Shayaz sighed. He crouched beside her and without saying a word, pulled her into his embrace. He patted her back in silent comfort, unsure of what to say. After a while, Rong Moore's sobs quieted down. She wiped her tear-streaked face and said hoarsely, "Thank you, Gu Shayaz." Gu Shayaz chuckled and said with a hint of self-mockery, "I don't deserve your thanks. Before he finished his words, Rong Moore shook her head and said, "What happened to me isn't your fault. You weren't obligated to help me. Don't blame yourself." Even though she said this, guilt still weighed heavily on Gu Shayaz. Not wanting to continue the conversation, he cleared his throat and said, "You should get dressed." Only then did Rong Moore realize she was wearing nothing but her underwear. Even though she had been tainted, she still felt a deep sense of shame at exposing herself in front of a man. "I will step outside," Gu Shayaz said, quickly leaving the room. Outside, he collapsed onto a chair, lost in thought. Raising his hands, he noticed they were damp with sweat. Rubbing his palms on his pants, he tried to wipe the moisture away, but no matter how much he rubbed, his palms remained wet. His gaze flickered between his damp pants and his still-dripping hands. A strange thought crossed his mind and he thought, "Am I sick?" Just as he started to worry about an unknown illness, a droplet of water slipped from his palm and hit the ground. Then another and another. The drops gradually increased, forming a small puddle beneath him. He was stunned by this and recalled how one of Pei Yijun's teammates had the ability to create water from her fingertips. "Am I also?" he muttered under his breath. On impulse, he lifted his fingers to his mouth and sucked on them. Cool. Fresh liquid trickled onto his tongue, and his eyes widened in shock. The water was cool. It tasted just like spring water with a faint hint of sweetness. With water supplies running low, Gu Shayaz had been feeling thirsty for days. He ignored all hesitation and kept drinking, savoring the cool relief the water brought to him as he hummed in satisfaction. At that moment, Rong Moore stepped out of the locker room, only to stop in her tracks. What she saw made her eyes widen in shock. Gu Shayaz sat there, fingers in his mouth, eyes half-lidded in pleasure as he sucked on them. A chill ran down her spine instantly. She had escaped from those beasts, only to end up with a pervert. Clenching her fists, she stammered, "W, what are you doing?" At the sound of her voice, Gu Sheaz snapped out of his trance. His dazed expression cleared, and his face immediately turned crimson. He pulled his fingers from his mouth and stammered, "It's not what you think. I'm not a pervert." Rongmore narrowed her eyes and asked, "Then what exactly were you doing?" Raising his dripping hands, Gu Sheaz quickly explained, "I think I have a water ability. My palms keep secreting water, so I was drinking it." She eyed his hands suspiciously, until she saw the thin layer of water covering his skin and trickling down his arms. Her throat burned with thirst. Without another thought, she rushed over, grabbed his hand, and exclaimed, "Don't waste the water." Then, without hesitation, she lowered her head and licked his palm. Gu Sheaz stiffened instantly. A soft, wet tongue slid across his skin, lapping up the water greedily. Heat surged through his body as his mind went blank. As a normal young man, his body reacted instinctively, but he knew she had just suffered a traumatic experience, so he didn't want to scare her. Taking a deep breath, he forced himself to stay calm. In a strained voice, he said, "Rongmore, see, can you let go? I will fill a water bottle for you." Chapter 46. None was spared. Rongmore gulped down a few more mouthfuls before reluctantly letting go of his hand. She quickly pulled out her water bottle, uncapped it, and held it up. She looked at him and said, "Gu Sheaz, try focusing the water into your forefinger. I saw my Omeo do that before." Hearing this, Gu Sheaz nodded and said, "I will try." Closing his eyes, he focused inward. A strange sensation stirred within him as he felt a warm energy flowing in his veins. Moments later, the water on his palm vanished, and a steady trickle began to flow from his forefinger and entered the bottle. Both of them stared in awe. Their gazes met, and grins spread across their faces. They no longer had to worry about running out of water anymore. While the two were busy learning to control their newfound abilities, the lecture hall descended into chaos. Terrified screams and desperate cries mixed with the guttural roars of zombies. "Act help." A student let out a blood-curdling scream as his friend sank his teeth into his neck. Blood spurted out like a fountain when his neck was bitten off, filling the air with the thick scent of iron and sending the zombies into a frenzy. Roar! Standing in the corner of the lecture hall, Brother Yang hurled a fireball the size of an orange at the nearest zombie that was pouncing at him. Boom! The fireball struck the zombie's face and exploded on impact. In the past, this attack had been enough to take down a zombie by burning half of the brain. Believing it was dead, Brother Yang let his guard down and turned toward Teacher Cow as he asked, "Brother Cow, what should we do now?" Before he could get an answer, a rancid stench filled his nostrils. As soon as he smelled this, his heart skipped a beat. Crash. Cuck. A sudden, intense pain shot through his body. His face paled as he turned his head, only to see a zombie with half its face burned, sinking its teeth deep into his shoulder and tearing away a chunk of flesh. His entire body trembled from pain and fear as he stretched a desperate hand toward Teacher Cow, pleading, "Save me." Crash, crash, crash. His breath stuck in his throat when he heard sickening growls and the wet, sticky sound of chewing right beside his ear. Before his mind could fully process what was happening, his vision blurred. The world spun until suddenly he found himself looking at his own body being eaten by several zombies. Horror gripped him as he realized that his neck had been broken. A moment later, he watched with terror as the zombies' sharp claws plunged into his skull. Seeing his men get slaughtered one after another, cold sweat covered Teacher Cow's forehead and back. His eyes darted around frantically as he tried to search for an escape route. After indulging himself in excess lust over the past 2 days, his stamina was far from when he had just awakened his ability. Now, he was already gasping for breath after fighting for half an hour, barely managing to fend off the zombies' continuous attacks. When he saw that the area near the door was clear of zombies, he sprinted toward the door. But just as he reached it, a zombie lunged at him from behind. Roar! His face went pale when he heard the roar. With only a split second to react, he leaned to the side, narrowly avoiding the zombie's sharp claws. But before he could recover, it lunged at him again. In desperation, he grabbed a nearby female student and shoved her forward toward the incoming zombies. Ack! Caught off guard, the student stumbled. Before she could regain her footing, the zombie pounced at her, sinking its teeth into her neck. Teacher Cow's face turned even paler at the sight. Without a second glance, he bolted toward the door. The moment he stepped through, he slammed it shut and with trembling hands fumbled for his keys. His fingers shook as he locked the door. Ignoring the frantic banging and desperate pleas from inside, he sprinted toward the emergency stairs. At this moment, his mind was consumed by a single thought: escape. He must escape from this place. By the time he reached the ground floor, his lungs were burning as he gasped for breath. Without even considering the risk, he opened the entrance door and ran out into the storm. Within minutes, the heavy downpour had soaked him to the bone. Yet, despite the cold on his body and his heavy steps, he didn't dare stop. He ran blindly, never looking back. Finally, after more than an hour, he spotted an abandoned house. Relief spread on his face as he stumbled inside, gasping for breath. He slammed the door shut and blocked it with heavy furniture before he flopped to the ground, fainting from exhaustion. In his frantic escape, he failed to notice the eerie silence of the streets and the subtle tremors in the ground. More than 2 kilometers from him, a massive horde of zombies was moving toward Linen University at a slow yet orderly speed. More and more zombies join the horde from every direction. Their numbers keep increasing as time passes. By the time the horde reached 1,000, it finally stopped growing. Meanwhile, back at Linen University, the rain showed no sign of stopping. Trapped in the guard post, Rongmore and Gu Shayaz could only ease their hunger by drinking water. Thankfully, before he ran out of energy, Gu Shayaz had managed to produce 4 liters of clean water. As for the remaining students in the hall, most had already turned into zombies, while the rest had been devoured alive. None was spared from the calamity, including Mo Binksu, who was tied up in the corner. By midnight, the rain had finally begun to ease. A heavy, suffocating tension hung in the air, accompanied by the lurking danger. In the mountain villa, Jin Zuyan stood by the window and checked his watch. Chapter 47, Mutating. As the clock struck midnight, the rain stopped abruptly. The thick storm clouds parted, revealing a blood-red moon hanging ominously in the sky. His eyes narrowed at this sight. Without hesitation, he turned to his team and said, "Wake up! It's time to move." The soldiers stirred immediately, as most of them were a light sleeper. Within 10 minutes, they had packed their gear and climbed into their trucks and armored vehicles. Under the dimmed illumination of the red moonlight, their convoy left the villa, heading straight for Linen University. Inside the armored car, Jin Zuyan checked his watch again, his fingers clenching into fists. He had expected casualties during the storm, but thanks to their precautions, none of his men had turned into zombies. Although no one turned into zombies, several soldiers had developed high fevers and fell into a coma. They were showing signs of awakening their abilities. Unlike those who awaken their abilities caused by a zombie's bite or scratch, awakenings caused by the natural causes had a higher survival rate. As long as they controlled the fever and kept the men hydrated, the chances of survival were as high as 20%. Thinking about the low number, Jin Zuyan exhaled sharply. Now they can only do their best. He hoped none of his men would die in the process. At the same time, a figure was walking stiffly as she dragged her wounded body along the road. Her long hair had long lost its luster and turned yellow and dry. As she walked, her hair fluttered in the wind and strands fell to the ground. Her white dress was covered in dark, dried blood and rotten flesh. A wound the size of a ping-pong ball could be seen on her calf. The blood had long stopped flowing from the wound, but the area around it was rotting slowly. Feeling the pain in her calf and the piercing pain in her head, Mo Bingsu had only one thought in her mind at that moment. She must find a place to hide and survive. As her body temperature kept dropping, the red veins in her eyes became denser. Her black pupils had already turned gray and looked like a dead fish's eyes. Opening her mouth, she let out a ho-ho-ho sound. Even though her mind had become sluggish and it took her a long time to process things, she still understood what was happening. She was turning into a zombie, a brainless monster that only knew how to eat flesh and looked disgusting. A drop of dark blood slowly rolled from the corner of her eye as she thought, I don't want to become a monster. I shouldn't end up like this. I want to live. Unfortunately, no matter how unwilling she was, the mutation in her body continued. Half an hour later, she finally stopped moving and stood on the road with her head tilted back at a strange angle, her eyes closed. Her hands hung limply at her sides, and her legs stiffened. The next moment, her eyes suddenly snapped open. Her gray eyes glinted with a strange light. There was a fleeting hint of clarity in that pair of dull eyes. Her head moved stiffly as she looked around, as if trying to see where she was. She raised her bluish, pale hands for a long time before finally opening her mouth and letting out a loud roar. Roar! As soon as she roared, another roar was heard in the distance. Roar! The moment she heard the roar, her body stiffened. After a while, she turned around and walked stiffly toward Linen University. At the same time, the huge crowd of zombies less than 2 kilometers away suddenly became chaotic. Half of them went out of control, roaring as they wandered around. As the zombies kept moving forward, those that wandered around slowly fell behind and detached from the group. The massive horde suddenly halved, and the rumbling on the ground lessened. Meanwhile, at Linen University, Rongmore and Gu Sheaz noticed that the rain had stopped. They found a backpack and packed a set of clothes, a pair of shoes, and any food or medicine they could find in the guard room. When they were done, they found several tactical batons in a locker. They tied one to their thighs and stored the rest in their backpack. The batons were made of special materials and were very durable. They could use them as weapons. Both of them were ability users, and the weight of the baton felt light in their hands. Besides the batons, they also found 2 fighting knives, a multi-tool knife, a pocket knife, and a taser. Since Rongmore had a fire-type ability with high attack power, she took only 1 fighting knife and gave the rest to Gu Sheaz. After putting on the guards' tactical uniforms, the 2 of them finally left the guard room and walked to the entrance. This time, they heard the roars of zombies in the distance and looked at each other. Since the roars were coming from the left, they decided to go in the right direction. They headed to the parking lot and chose an SUV with a truck bed. After prying open the door, they threw out useless things and searched for the keys. 5 minutes later, they couldn't find the key and had no choice but to try hot-wiring the engine. Neither of them had ever stolen a car before, so they could only try their luck. Gu Sheaz held 2 cables in his hands and rubbed them together again and again. 10 minutes later, the engine finally roared to life. Hearing this, he quickly sat in the driver's seat and said, "Let's go." Rongmore nodded and locked the door after she sat in the passenger seat. The car had only half a tank of gas, so they decided to find a gas station first. With thumping hearts, they drove to the entrance and left the university. Unbeknownst to them, a pair of black eyes were locked in their direction. As the figure lowered its body, ready to chase after them, a roar came from the distance. As soon as it heard the roar, it changed direction and moved in the direction of the roar. Chapter 48, Territorial Fight. After another hour, the zombie horde finally stopped when it was a kilometer away from Linen University. Arriving on top of a 5-story building, a zombie with long limbs raised its head and let out a long roar. Roar! As soon as the roar sounded, another roar came from the distance. 10 minutes later, a figure suddenly appeared behind the zombie and swung its massive arms. Noticing the attack, the long-limbed zombie raised its arms to block the attack. Boom! The collision created a ring of wind waves, sending dust and debris in all directions. Before the dust and wind settled, a loud roar came from the center of the fight. Roar! Following this, the zombie with massive arms suddenly jumped a few meters to the side. Letter 1D627, letter 1D45F, letter 1D452, letter 1D452, letter 1D638, letter 1D626, letter 1D624, letter 1D630, letter 1D4C2. Boom! A fireball the size of 2 basketballs flew past it and hit the next building with a loud explosion. The rooftop shattered, leaving a huge hole in the wall. The zombies let out low growls as they stared at each other from a distance. As brainless monsters, they were controlled by their instincts and highly territorial. So, whenever 2 zombies of the same level appeared in the same place, they would fight until one of them was dead. After a few seconds, the fire-type zombie suddenly raised its head and opened its mouth wide. The next moment, another fireball shot toward the big-arm zombie at high speed. Seeing the incoming attack, the big-arm zombie jumped to dodge the fireball. But before it could land, another fireball was already in front of it. Boom! The moment the attack landed, the fire-type zombie rushed forward, its claws aiming for the big-arm zombie's head. Sensing the danger, the big-arm zombie jumped to the side. Crack! The fire-type zombie's claws missed the target and stabbed into the ground instead. Due to the sharpness of its claws and its immense strength, half of its arm was buried in the ground. Seizing the opportunity, the big-arm zombie pounced and wrapped its arms around the fire-type zombie's body from behind. Crack, crack, crack. As the big-arm zombie tightened its arms, the sound of bones cracking echoed in the air. The big-arm zombie tightened its grip, locking the fire-type zombie in place despite its struggle. The next second, it opened its mouth wide and bit into the fire-type zombie's neck. Roar! Although the fire-type zombie no longer felt pain, it let out an annoyed roar with a hint of panic. It struggled fiercely as the big-arm zombie continued biting its flesh, trying to rip off its head. It knew that if it didn't free itself, it would lose. In a final desperate struggle, the fire-type zombie used all of its energy to create a layer of fire around its body. When the big-arm zombie saw the flames, it didn't let go. Instead, it became even more frantic, biting down harder on its enemy's neck as the fire burned its rotten flesh. Crack, crash. Suddenly, the sound of bones snapping and flesh tearing filled the air. A second later, the flames surrounding the zombies vanished, and a head rolled to the ground. Black blood and rotten flesh splattered across the rooftop after the short battle. The big-arm zombie threw the headless body aside and picked up the severed head. Raising one of its burnt arms, it plunged its fingers through the skull. When it pulled its hand back, a red-colored crystal core was clutched between its fingers. Opening its mouth, it swallowed the crystal core before raising its head and letting out a loud roar, proclaiming its territory. Aroyarar. Following the roar, the restless zombies on the street scattered. Amidst the zombies, Mo Binksu, who had already turned into one of them, suddenly reached out and grabbed a nearby zombie. With her arms, she pried open its skull and ate the rotten brain. After finishing the brain, she grabbed another zombie and continued feasting. Under the bright sunlight, her white dress slowly turned dark red from the flowing black blood. At the same time, Jin Zuyan and his team entered the main road. Since Linen University was located in the suburbs, the road was not as congested as the city center. As a result, the path was clear and they traveled smoothly. But despite the ease of travel, he couldn't shake off the unease in his heart. When the clock struck 10 in the morning, they finally noticed something strange. There were no zombies on the road. It was as if the apocalypse didn't exist. Sitting in the passenger seat, Jin Zuyan kept dialing, trying to contact Pei Yijun. After numerous attempts, the call finally connected. Hello. We are coming. Get ready. When we arrive, we will leave immediately, Jin Zuyan said. We have our own cars. We will leave now and meet you on the road. After a brief moment of thought, Jin Zuyan said, "All right." When the call ended, Pei Yijun and his team were already loading the supplies they had found in the kitchen and pantry. They gathered some rods and tools as weapons before climbing into their vehicles. After they left, Jiao Lijai walked into the kitchen and stored the stoves and gas cylinders in her space. She then went to the pantry and stored the shelves, planning to use them to organize her supplies in the space later. Only after taking everything did she leave the restaurant. By then, the supplies had already been placed in the back seat and hidden compartments, leaving the truck bed empty. Before they left the parking lot, Pei Yijun leaned out of the window and said, "Jiao Lijai, follow us closely." Hearing this, Jiao Lijai rolled her eyes inwardly. Why didn't I realize this young master was so naggy? She thought inwardly. "Jiao Lijai," Pei Yijun called out again. Afraid that he would continue nagging, she leaned on the window and said, "I know, just drive." Satisfied with the response, Pei Yijun finally closed the window, started the engine, and drove out of the parking lot. Jiao Lijai glanced at the rearview mirror for a moment before following after him. Chapter 49. Aitg, it's me. 10 minutes ago, Jiao Lijai heard faint sounds of fighting coming from the direction of Linen University. It seemed that what had happened in her previous life was still occurring. The only difference was that, in this life, the intelligent, high-level zombies from her past had been eliminated before the rain. Although she didn't know if her actions would change the future, or if she would even survive longer than in her previous life, Jiao Lijai had no regrets. After all, her rebirth had already altered the course of fate. As for Mo Bingsu, it was a pity that she couldn't kill her with her own hands. But as zombies mutate, Linen University will soon become a zombie nest. No matter how powerful or scheming she is, she can't leave here alive. She only hoped that she could experience the horror and pain of being eaten alive before she died. After more than an hour of driving, they finally left the suburban area and entered the main road. Not long after, they spotted several military armored vehicles and trucks approaching from the opposite direction. Seeing this, Pei Yijun slowed down and pulled over to the roadside. Following behind him, Li Yang and Jiao Lijai also slowed down and parked their cars. Sitting inside her vehicle, Jiao Lijai narrowed her eyes as she watched the fleet slow down and stop at the roadside. She had assumed that the Pei family would only send a small group of soldiers. Unexpectedly, they send so many soldiers just to escort the heir back home. As she observed the soldiers stepping out of their vehicles, she tried to recall any memories of the Pei family from her previous life. From the bits and pieces of information she had heard from survivors at the base, she knew that the Pei family was one of the key forces behind one of the largest bases in Huaxia. Although their base was massive, with 3 times the number of survivors compared to Sachu City's base, their overall strength was still slightly weaker than Sanchu base. As this thought crossed her mind, her gaze landed on a tall man stepping out of an armored vehicle. "Why is he here?" she muttered in surprise the moment she saw his face clearly. As soon as Jin Zuyan got out of the car, he strode across the road with large steps. At that moment, Pei Yijun and his team also stepped out of their vehicles, looking at him. But instead of greeting them, he walked straight toward the last car in hurried steps. Within 2 minutes, he was already standing beside the vehicle, knocking on the window. After a brief pause, the window rolled down, revealing the face he had longed to see for so many years. The moment he confirmed she was alive and breathing, his eyes turned red and teary. Without a word, he reached out for her. His broad palm grasped the back of her neck and pulled her close. Under everyone's gaze, he leaned down and kissed her soft lips. Jiao Lijai froze as his thin, warm lips pressed against hers. Her eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, she forgot to react. Jin Zuyan's kiss was urgent yet gentle. He knew that in this life, his girl might have forgotten him, so he didn't dare linger too long. After licking and sucking her lips briefly, he let her go. Looking into her stunned eyes, he let out a low chuckle. Closing his eyes, he kissed her forehead and murmured hoarsely, "Ah, Jai, I'm so glad you are safe. I missed you so much." Not far from them, the soldiers' jaws nearly dropped to the ground as they witnessed their captain suddenly kissing a girl. Even Chin Luzi, who had known him for years, was completely stunned. They had been acquainted for over 6 years, and this was the first time he had ever seen Jin Zuyan get close to a woman. Pei Yijun, watching from the side, was equally shocked. After the initial surprise, his gaze gradually turned cold, and he clenched his fists. Unaware of their reactions, Jiao Lijai stared at the man in front of her, feigned ignorance, and asked, "Who are you?" Although he had expected that she might not remember their childhood memories, Jin Zuyan still felt a pang of disappointment at her words. His expression turned sorrowful as he asked, "Aitg, do you really not remember me?" His voice carried a deep grievance, as if he might break down if she dared to nod. Jiao Lijai licked her lips as she took in his teary, puppy-like eyes. She couldn't believe that the ruthless, cold-blooded leader of Sanchu Base was now looking at her as if he had been wronged. After hesitating for a moment, she decided to be honest and said, "I'm sorry, I don't remember." She thought he would be upset or disheartened by her words. To her surprise, he smiled and said, "It's okay if Aitg doesn't remember. As long as I remember our promise, that is enough." He rubbed her nape gently and said in a low voice, "Aitg, we were childhood sweethearts. We promised to be together for the rest of our lives. We grew up in happy orphanage. It's understandable that you forgot about me. You were only 7 when I left." At the end of his words, he let out a sigh of regret. They were so close that she could smell his masculine scent and taste him in her mouth. After hearing his words, a vague image of a handsome, tall boy flashed in her mind. She studied him for a while before tentatively asking, "Brother Yan." Hearing the familiar name, Jin Zuyan grinned and replied, "Aitg, it's me." As they locked eyes, Pei Yijun suddenly walked over and said, "Captain Jin, this place isn't safe. We should leave now." Jin Zuyan frowned slightly at the interruption but straightened his back and let Jiao Lijai go. He nodded and opened the car door as he said, "You are right. We should leave as soon as possible." Chapter 50, A Bold Idea. After speaking, Jin Zuyan reached for Jiao Lijai's wrist and gently but firmly led her to the passenger seat. Without resistance, she sat down, allowing him to buckle her seatbelt. Once he was done, he turned to Zhang Yuan and ordered, "Zhang Yuan, we are going to the factory area. Lead the way." Hearing his order, Zhang Yuan nodded and said, "Yes, Captain." Jin Zuyan then took the role as driver for Jiao Lijai and sat in the driver's seat. Looking at Pei Yijun, he said, "Young Master Pei, you can follow the armored vehicle and be at ease. I will take care of the rest." Pei Yijun met his gaze for a moment before glancing at Jiao Lijai. Without a word, he turned and walked to his jeep. Soon after, he started the engine and followed the fleet. Sitting beside him, Feng Yun suddenly sighed and said, "A beautiful flower will always have an owner." Hearing this, Pei Yijun shot him a glare and said coldly, "Shut up." Sensing his bad mood, Feng Yun exchanged glances with Luo Jiang and wisely decided to stay silent. Someone was clearly jealous. It was best not to provoke him. Behind them, Jiao Lijai observed the man driving the car and asked, "Brother Yan, what's your plan next?" Hearing her soft voice, Jin Zuyan's mood brightened and asked her back, "Aitg, do you have any plans?" She looked at him and recalled the last call in her past life, in the moment before she was torn apart. It had seemed as if someone had jumped from a building, trying to catch her. That person might have been him. Noticing her distraction, Jin Zuyan glanced at her through the rearview mirror and asked, "Aitg, what are you thinking about?" Jiao Lijai snapped out of her thoughts at his words, shook her head, and said, "It's nothing." "I plan to gather more supplies before heading to Sanchu City," she added. Jin Zuyan's eyes flickered momentarily when he heard her words before returning to normal. He nodded and said, "If Aitg wants to go, then I will accompany you." Glancing at his military uniform, Jiao Lijai asked, "Don't you need to escort Pei Yijun to Jiangning City?" "Why do you think I have to do that?" he asked in return. "Well, he said that you and your team were sent by his father to escort him back to Jiangning City," Jiao Lijai replied. At his words, Jin Zuyan sneered and said, "He really dares to talk. His father begged me to come and rescue him. I never agreed to send him back to Jiangning City. Besides, his father is just a businessman. He has no right to order me around." Jiao Lijai glanced at him and noticed his grip on the steering wheel tighten. It seemed that Jin Zuyan and the Pei family had an unusual relationship. Jin Zuyan raised an eyebrow when she remained silent and asked, "What? Aitg doesn't believe me." "I believe you," Jiao Lijai said with a chuckle. After a moment, she suddenly asked, "Brother Yan, how have you been? Have you been living well all these years?" Jin Zuyan was caught off guard by her sudden question. Memories of his previous life, the hell he had endured after her death, flashed through his mind, and murderous intent surged in his heart. Taking a deep breath to suppress his emotions, he replied casually, "Except for missing you so much, I have been doing well." Then he added, "Aitg, you promised to be my bride on my 12th birthday, and we even exchanged a kiss and a vow. So you have to take responsibility. You can't throw me away." Jiao Lijai frowned and asked doubtfully, "I did that." Hearing this, Jin Zuyan turned to look at her and said, "Aitg, you are not planning to break your promise, are you?" Before she could respond, he continued, "Aitg, after I was taken away, I held on to our promise and never got close to any other girl. I kept myself pure for you. I'm already 25, and you are the only girl I ever hug and kiss. I'm old now, and no one wants me. If you abandon me, what should I do?" he asked with a sigh. Jiao Lijai was stunned by his words. For a moment, she seriously doubted that this was the same man who had become an overlord in her previous life. They had the same face and the same figure, but why were their personalities like night and day? This person was too shameless. She looked at him but said nothing. She didn't believe his words. After all, he had never come looking for her in her past life. She had seen him before, and he had saved her life several times, but she was sure those were coincidences. Whenever he rescued her, it had been during a mission, and he had saved others along with her. Maybe she had only been a passerby in his life. Saving her had been no different from saving a stray dog or a beggar. It hadn't meant anything. Reaching this conclusion, she suddenly felt annoyed and turned her head away. It was better not to take his words seriously. The harsh lessons of her past life had cost her everything, and she couldn't afford to make the same mistake again in this life. As he drove, Jin Zuyan noticed her sudden change in mood. Seeing her gloomy and distant expression, a deep frown appeared on his face. Gripping the wheel tightly, he tried to recall the events of her previous life. Based on the information he had gathered, she shouldn't have been here. She had never been involved with Pei Yijun and his team. Also, that woman was supposed to be here, but there was no sign of her. Has something happened that changed the course of events? As this thought crossed his mind, his eyes flashed with doubts. He glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror, and a bold idea took root in his mind.